The movie begins in Eastleigh, Nairobi, Kenya, where we're introduced to Alia's family. Alia's mom, Fatima, can be seen baking bread for her family business, while her father, Musa, fixes a hula hoop for her to play with. Despite the constant checkpoints and armed men patrolling the streets, as the area they live in is controlled by Al-Shabaab militia, 10-year-old Alia finds joy within the safety of their walled compound as she swirls the hula hoop around her body with excitement. The scene then shifts to Surrey, England, where Colonel Katherine Powell is awakened by her husband snoring. She goes to her garden office shed to review surveillance photos of wanted high-value individuals who appear to be terrorists of Somali and Western descent. Powell focuses on a highlighted British white woman named Susan Helen, aka Aisha. She receives a horrific email informing her of a recently posted news video clip of a man executed in Kenya for being a suspected British spy against the Somali Al-Shabaab militants. Then, Powell drives from home to work at the Permanent Joint Headquarters in London. She is disappointed to learn from Sergeant Mishtaq that she'll only have 2 Hellfire missiles for her mission. However, Powell assures Lieutenant General Frank that everything is in place for today's mission. In the next scene, one of the suspects from Powell's surveillance photos, Mohammed Abdusalam, a young American, arrives at Nairobi airport and is watched by Kenyan agent Atieno. Atieno follows him around, takes a few pictures, and radios his intel. Then we see Powell video conferencing with her military partners, including Lieutenant Steve Watts. Powell briefs them about their mission codenamed Operation Egret. They will fly a joint operation over Nairobi, Kenya, as key members of Al-Shabaab have a meeting in the suburbs of Parklands and a house that belongs to Shahid Ahmed. And Shahid Ahmed is some kind of Al-Shabaab facilitator. Abdullah Al-Hadi and his wife Susan, aka Aisha, are connected to recent bombings in the region. They're also number 4 and 5 on their list of East African most wanted, and they've been tracking them for almost 6 years now. They will continue to Nairobi today to use the house as a transit for 2 new recruits, Mohammed, an American, and Rashid, who's from Britain. Once all the wanted personnel are in the house, the Kenyan Special Forces, residing just a few blocks from the target building, will launch a cordon and search operation to capture and not kill. The job of the team is to be the eye in the sky for the mission. Steve and Carrie proceed to their stations in the ground control station and receive mission status information from the crewmen switching shifts with them. Meanwhile, British intelligence spies Jama and Damisi, both Somalis, view micro RPA bird drone camera surveillance for the second suspect arriving at the Parklands compound from their surveillance base in a van. Then we see the little girl Alia setting up her bread-selling stand amidst Al-Shabaab militant men, enforcing strict Sharia law dress codes for women in public. Then the scene shifts to General Benson as he arrives at the British Cabinet Office building and is greeted by the coordinator Jack, who leads him into the briefing room for the Cobra meeting. Present in the room are other British government officials, and the purpose of the meeting is to witness the capture of Susan, also known as Aisha, and they all settle in to watch the operation unfold. Meanwhile, at the airport, Rashid, a suspect of Powell's surveillance photos, arrives and is driven to the building under surveillance by an Al-Shabaab personnel. Agent Atieno alerts Major Moses Owiti, who's actually also responsible for the Kenyan Special Forces. Then Major Moses informs Powell of the development. At Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, Lucy begins her night shift at her Air Force Base image analysis job and is briefed about the terrorists they are tracking in Nairobi. Back at the operation site, Paul contacts Major Moses and requests Jama and Damisi to try to get a bird's eye view inside the target's house using a surveillance drone. However, all the shutters are closed and they cannot risk using their other option, Ringo, an even smaller Beetle drone, until the arrival of the third suspect. As the mission units watch the Reaper drone and bird surveillance video of the suspects, Lucy identifies them as Mohammed and Rashid, and they exit the house before Susan arrives, raising concerns about the reliability of their intelligence. However, a covered woman quickly emerges from the house and gets into an SUV with dark-tinted windows, preventing their surveillance cameras from capturing her face. Although the mission units believe this covered woman to be Susan, they're surprised that she's leaving the house since they're intelligence indicates that she's supposed to come to the house. Powell and Major Moses decide against sending troops in yet and opt to have Agent Atieno follow the suspect's vehicle. All the mission units watch as Agent Atieno follows the suspect's SUV until it reaches an Al-Shabaab militia-controlled checkpoint in the Islay area, which is too dangerous to proceed. Therefore, Atieno is ordered to return to base. The suspect's SUV takes turns in the militia-controlled neighborhood until it enters a gated compound where the suspects go into the house without being identified. Powell and Major Moses strongly believe that the covered girl is probably Susan, but they must positively identify her before they can authorize an attack. Therefore, Powell asks Major Moses to have Jama use a tiny Beetle surveillance camera drone to get close to the house, which he hesitantly agrees to. Jama buys a stack of plastic buckets and a jacket from a street vendor to create a cover identity, then negotiates his way past the militia checkpoint and sets up a safe position near the suspect's house. He then activates the surveillance Beetle to fly inside, and all mission units watch its surveillance video on their screens as it enters the house. And they finally identify the covered lady that they followed as Susan. As soon as Powell receives the information, she alerts General Benson, who shares the information with the senior cabinet. They discuss the potential of a drone strike to eliminate the suspects, but Angela and George object, stating that they only intended to witness a capture, not an assassination. Benson informs Powell that they can't approve a drone strike. She then informs him that it's a must to wait until they leave the area before resorting to the ground forces. Meanwhile, as the mission units continue to monitor the suspects, they spot Abdullah sitting next to his wife Susan. Powell then orders Jama to have the Beetle explore the house, and the units watch the Beetle's footage with shock as they see a man, Usman, laying out vests packed with explosives. Powell realizes that Usman is preparing to record a video and urgently calls for legal experts as all units watch the suspect set up for the video. However, Benson informs Powell that they cannot bomb the house immediately as the politicians have only approved witnessing a capture and they need to obtain legal clearance. Powell consults with military lawyer Major Harold, but he says that the rules of engagement only allow for a low collateral damage estimate and they must consider the explosives inside the house as well. Powell contacts Benson to refer up to the Attorney General, but George asks senior politician Wooddale for permission. Angela opposes targeting two British nationals and an American, arguing that bombing a friendly country is not really something that's ever happened unless the two countries are at war with each other. In the next scene, Powell has Sergeant Mushtaq create new collateral damage assessment indicator rings on screen to overlay on top of the images of the house. Powell speaks with the drone pilot directly, instructing him to keep collateral damages to a minimum. However, Steve and Carrie express uneasiness as they've never attacked anything before. Despite their reservations, Steve and Carrie begin the process of preparing to launch, reading from the checklist binder. As George, Benson, and Wooddale continue to argue about the legalities of the bombing, Angela raises political and ethical considerations, particularly with an American citizen involved. Wooddale shifts the blame, stating that he'll have to refer up to the Foreign Secretary. Wooddale and Benson implore Jack to hurry in reaching the Foreign Secretary because their eye in the sky can only follow one of the two suspects' vehicles if they happen to leave. Angela suggests ground agents could intercept, but Benson argues that intercepting a bomber on the streets would be a really bad way to maximize the damage. Powell calls Major Moses to have him tell Jama to prepare to leave as there might be a missile attack in the area soon. Meanwhile, Steve and Carrie have completed the launch checklist, and Walsh waits for the rules of engagement clearance as the bombing pilots and colleagues tense up. Powell tells them to sit tight and get ready to shoot. Mission units watch the screens as Mohammed Rashid, Susan, and Abdullah go to the bedroom to arm the two young bombers with explosive vests. Powell urgently texts Benson that they need an answer now, and Jack puts the call to James on speakerphone. However, James, the Foreign Secretary, is on the toilet with food poisoning in a Singapore hotel and says that he can't authorize a missile attack on an American citizen without approval from the US Secretary of State, Ken, who is currently staying in China. The scene shifts to Beijing, China, where the US Secretary is interrupted while playing table tennis by a phone call. He quickly grants permission to prosecute a US citizen who's joined Al-Shabaab, declaring him an enemy of the USA. Jack informs Benson, Wooddale, and Angela that the Secretary of state has given clearance for the mission. All the units sit and watch as the vests are being prepared and wired. Benson texts Powell that she's got clearance, and Steve prepares to prosecute the target by launching a Hellfire missile. Steve and Carrie begin their final preparations. However, they pause when they see Alia playing with her hula hoop at the edge of the screen. Steve recognizes her and decides to give her time to walk by. Powell becomes anxious and urges Steve to take action. Steve reserves his right to have a new collateral damage estimate run, which buys them some time, and they are put on weapons hold. Furious, Powell tells Mishtaq to rerun the collateral damage estimate and Major Moses to go buy Alia's bread and get her to safety. Jama buys all of Alia's bread, but an armed Al-Shabaab guard recognizes him. As he and his team try to arrest him, Jama throws his buckets of bread at the gunman and runs for his life. Mission units react in terror and Powell watches with despair, but Jama successfully escapes. Then, Powell tells Carrie to pan back to the house where they see Alia picking up the bread left behind, setting up and selling them again. Mission units argue about striking the house with her nearby. Military law expert Harold suggests referring to the Attorney General regarding Alia's presence. George tells Benson that a 65 to 75% fatality is estimated, and from the assessment, they decide to delay things and give the girl a chance to walk away. Powell insists that if the suspects leave the house, the crowded city is at risk. Benson and Powell argue for the striking now, risking one to save many, but Angela's ethics cause her to disagree. In the meantime, the US National Security Council senior legal advisor patches into the video conference and makes it clear that the White House assesses Alia as an acceptable collateral damage and wants them to bomb the house now before the suspect can get the bomb to a crowded location. James is still indecisive and haunted by Alia's image. Wooddale also recommends that they don't delay in the interest of saving a lot of people. Angela and James argue about the publicity element of killing Alia to save 80 other people. They worry that if Al-Shabaab kills 80 people, the military will lose the propaganda war. However, if the military ends up killing one girl, Al-Shabaab will also end up winning the propaganda war by stating that a foreign government has killed an innocent Kenyan girl. As Alia sells more bread and Rashid's vest is being wired with explosives, Benson asks if the lives of 80 people, including children, are worth the price of winning the propaganda war. James is still tormented by Alia's image, and he passes blame to get clearance from the Prime Minister, who may be difficult to reach. But Jack immediately leaves to contact him. Alia has only 2 loaves of bread left as surveillance footage shows Rashid being wired with a bomb vest. However, the Beatles battery dies and they lose the image, leaving them blind to what's happening. Powell discreetly asks Benson if her targeter can bring the collateral damage assessment for the girl below 50% so that they can get approval to save her. Benson responds positively, and Powell then asks Mishtaq to change the target area to reduce collateral damage to Alia, and Mishtaq sets out to find a new target location. Suddenly, Jack returns and relays the Prime Minister's message to minimize casualties. George asks for interpretation, and Benson explains that military decisions cannot be made dictated by government committees or put on hold for legal clarification. Meanwhile, Powell is disappointed that Mishtaq cannot find a target location with collateral damage assessment below 65%, so she urges him to fudge the assessment to declare it down to 45% against his will. Powell shows the new target area to the mission units and tells them that it has a 45% chance of collateral fatality where Alia is, and with new collateral damage percentages, Benson gets Wooddale's permission to proceed with the missile strike. Steve and Carrie pray for Alia's escape, while Jama emerges from his hiding spot to find a boy named Ali to buy all of Alia's bread. Powell tells Steve and Carrie to fire the missile. Steve fires a missile and the impact is gonna be in 50 seconds. 40 seconds till impact, Ali rushes up to the house, buys the bread and runs off. With 15 seconds left, Alia folds her tablecloth as Steve and Carrie urge her to move away quickly. However, the missile goes through the roof of the house and explodes, causing a secondary explosion from the bomb vests, which rip the house apart. Powell watches, waiting for the dust to settle and the picture to become clear. They see Alia moving, but they zoom in on the terrorist targets to confirm they're dead. The scattered remains are zoomed in on, and Susan is identified as she tries to crawl away. Then, Powell orders Steve and Carrie to bomb again to kill Susan, and they comply in agony. Jama sees Alia bleeding and in pain. Steve pulls the trigger to release the second missile as Alia's father and mother cry out and run toward her. but they're all injured by the impact of the second explosion. The mission unit personnel are desolate about completing their duties. Powell expresses that she's done what had to be done to save a lot of lives and apologizes to Anam Mushtaq for making him lie about the collateral damage percentages to complete her mission. Musa and Fatima rush Alia to the hospital and the medical staff spring into action to save her. However, Alia is soon pronounced dead and her family is seen crying on her dead body. At Whitehall, the Cobra operation mission ends with George and Wooddale leaving. Angela tells Benson his actions were disgraceful, all done from the safety of his chair. Benson rebukes her, citing his first-hand experience with the aftermath of several bombings, and tells her that what she experienced today would have been a lot worse if they let them get away. And he tells her to never say to a soldier that he doesn't acknowledge the cost of war. Meanwhile, Steve and Carrie emerge from the ground control station looking completely distraught, while Powell drives home deeply reflecting on her actions. The movie concludes with a flashback of Alia gleefully playing with her hula hoop inside her family's compound. And that is how this amazing realistic movie comes to an end. I hope you guys enjoyed my recap. Make sure to leave a like, leave a comment, subscribe to my channel. I'll see you guys on my next recap. Bye.